EMP Series, Day 167. Lee walked in the direction of the church, focused on putting as much distance between himself and the town as he could. He was hoping to find Roger there to let him know that he didn't need to run, that he was free. He walked along stream beds and old logging roads. He even bushwhacked his own trail in a few places, doing his best to stay off the established roads and the more well-traveled paths. Major Stillman woke early, as he usually did. He found himself on his bed, fully clothed. He even still had his boots on. It had not been a good night for him. He drank too much scotch and was suffering from the fallout of that. He washed his face, brushed his teeth, and headed for the diner for some strong coffee. As he crossed the street, he saw Carl Fairley riding into town. He was furious and had things that he wanted to say to him, but now was not the time. He didn't have the strength or the clarity in his mind to play his particular chess game right now. The two locked eyes for a moment, until Major Stillman looked away and just kept walking without saying a word. That suited Carl just fine, as he had absolutely nothing to say to the Major. When Carl arrived in his office, he immediately noticed that Hammer was gone. One of Carl's deputies came bursting in and frantically filled him in on the murder of Hammer and the other deputy that took place yesterday. He told him about the unidentified body that was found in the drainage culvert also. He had with him a soldier who was on duty yesterday on the platform and heard the shots that killed Hammer and the deputy. He told Carl all the details of what he had heard, and he answered all Carl's questions. Carl searched for clues in the alley behind the jail, but found none. He could not determine where the gunman entered the woods or if he was alone. He traversed back and forth several times, but was unable to pick up a trail. Tyler Hobbs returned to his farmhouse and brought two of his closest group members up to speed on the meeting with Carl Fairley. He told them to keep it under wraps with the rest of the group for security reasons. Tyler had high hopes for their association with the constable. However, he still wasn't sure how it was all going to play out. It seemed to go well, but he had a difficult time reading Carl. He told his group that they were going to lay low for the time being until they could sort it all out. As Lee walked up the power line trail behind the church, he stopped and took the binoculars from his pack. He scanned the area and looked over the people working on the grounds at the church. There was a lot going on, but he didn't see Roger anywhere. He decided to try to move in for a closer look. He moved back into the woods and came around to the right of the pavilion and cautiously worked his way down toward the church. Steve, who was in the tower, spotted him first and radioed Greg, who alerted Richie, and the two of them went around and came up behind Lee. Greg called out for him to stop, and when he spun around, Richie held his rifle up and pointed it at him. Lee, seeing that they had the drop on him, dropped his rifle, as ordered, and sat down with his hands behind his head. When questioned, he told them that he just happened upon the church as he hiked along the trail. He claimed he was just passing through after fleeing from his hometown, some 30 miles away after it had been looted and burned out. This was happening in several smaller communities up and down the river valley, and his story seemed plausible. He was invited to join the group for lunch and told he would be given his weapon back when he was ready to leave. It became clear to Lee as he ate with the group that Roger was not there with them. The entire group came together for lunch, and Lee figured that if Roger was there, he too would have joined them for lunch. Lee was anxious to finish and get going. Sitting in one place after what happened yesterday made him uneasy. He wanted to find Roger. At the same time, he needed to put distance between himself and the murders that he committed yesterday. Carl was dealing with the murder of his deputy and Hammer, as well as the unidentified body found in the culvert the day before. He had an instinct that the two incidents were connected as he started his investigation. When he returned to his office, Major Stillman, who was feeling a little better, was sitting in the chair opposite his desk. He immediately started on Carl about storming out of the meeting the other day and moving the horses. He claimed a right to them and told Carl that hiding them would not deter him from his objective of obtaining them for his men. Carl interrupted him and asked him to leave. He informed him that he was in the initial stages of 2 murder investigations, and he didn't have time for him and his issues at the moment. Being summarily dismissed angered the major, and he wanted details of the murders. Carl just told him it was not a military matter, as he showed him out. Major Stillman promised Carl that their conversation was not over, as Carl slammed the door and returned to his desk. Carl couldn't get Tyler Hobbs out of his mind. The meeting the two had up at the hunting lodge stuck with him. He wanted to trust Tyler and to work with him to rid the region of the military's involvement. But something kept nagging at him. No matter how he considered it, he just could not bring himself to trust Tyler. His instincts told him that there was more than meets the eye when it came to Tyler Hobbs. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he just simply did not trust him. Captain Nunez watched the flurry of activity from his seat on the bench on the train platform. He saw Carl slam the door on Major Stillman as well. He knew Carl was a professional and wouldn't do anything to jeopardize the mission at hand. But at the same time, he knew the disdain Carl had for the major and was concerned that it could be a problem. In order to watch Major Stillman as closely as they needed to, they could not afford to rile him up. They needed him to be calm and to believe that he was in complete control. Right now, the major felt anything but in complete control. Yes, this concerned Captain Nunez greatly. He made his rendezvous a short time later with Section 7 and obtained the exact location of Carl's hunting camp and decided to meet with him there. He made his way into the mountains and camped in the hills overlooking the lodge. He didn't want to make Abigail and the kids nervous, so he decided to wait there for Carl to return before going down to the lodge. Section 7 also filled Nunez in on the fact that Carl had a surprise visit there yesterday from Tyler Hobbs. What is going on with Carl? The captain wondered. He was just as concerned for his friend as he was for the mission. As the group at the church finished lunch, Lee was chomping at the bit to leave. He thanked them for feeding him and explained that he wanted to get out and get the camp set up before nightfall, and so he would be leaving directly. Pastor invited him to stay the night and assured him that they had plenty of space in the dormitory for him, and that he would be comfortable for a day or two, and that he need not be in a hurry. As Lee thanked him again, but declined his offer, Dalton and Shima drove up to the pavilion. When Dalton saw Lee, he remembered him from town the other day, when Carl Fairley put him in jail overnight for being drunk and disorderly. "Are you feeling better today, friend?" he asked Lee. Lee nervously replied, "Do I know you?" Dalton explained that he was at the post the other day with Ish Patel when he got arrested. He had driven Ish into town to pick up supplies. Greg looked at Lee and asked, "Didn't you say you hiked up here from your hometown downriver? You never said anything about being put in jail." Lee, very uneasy now, told Greg that he had left that part out because he was embarrassed about being drunk. He told him that he was a recovering alcoholic and he fell off the wagon, and that he was put in jail to sleep off his drunkenness overnight. He almost pulled it off. Greg looked like he was buying the story when Dalton said, "You must have gotten released just in time. A deputy and the other prisoner with you that night were murdered yesterday." This news was new to Greg, and he slowly turned to face Lee, who could tell by Greg's demeanor that he was suspicious. Lee looked at his rifle leaning against the wall several feet away. As he did, Greg saw him, and both men went for their rifles at the same time. Lee reached it a split second before Greg, but as he picked it up, he noticed the green laser dot on his chest. He stopped abruptly, and as he did, Greg grabbed his rifle. Richie was in the tower watching the whole thing, had his AR trained on Lee. Greg informed Lee that they were going to bring him in to see Carl Fairley. They had no way of knowing that Carl was already looking for him, since he was released just an hour or so before the murders. Lee couldn't help but think that if only he didn't come to try to tell Roger that he was free, if only he just selfishly walked away, that he himself would now still be free. He thought maybe he could talk his way out of things with the constable, but he wasn't sure that he could. They tied his hands behind him with zip ties and loaded him into the power wagon. Off they drove toward town and Carl Fairley's office.